I did a talk called How to Survive, which drew on my experience as a Boy Scout, which is if you're in unfamiliar terrain, if you are disoriented, if you're dehydrated, what do you do to survive? And I think that many of us went through that phase. We need to design our organizations for uncertainty, and being able to be more nimble and more flexible and agile as a matter of course, just because 2020 proved how uncertain life can be. But going through a near-death experience makes you stronger in the long run.
I think out of the pandemic, what you've seen is that the businesses who have been able to pivot their business model a bit or pivot how they do things and react in an agile way have been the most successful businesses. Don't leave yourself inflexible. Make sure that as new information comes in, you're able to react to them. So these black swan events that might only happen once a lifetime, it doesn't make sense to set your business up in case there's another pandemic, because that makes you inefficient. But it's a mindset that is then put into practice by the way that you set things up, the way that you set up your systems, the way that you choose your priorities, the way that you structure your teams.
A few years ago, people were saying, okay, do you know how to use Excel? Do you know how to use Word? Do you know how to use PowerPoint? In a few years, people will expect you to be able to use automation tools to digitize some of your manual repetitive work, because that's going to improve your productivity. And the pandemic has actually created a clear urgency that people had to go this way, because any business that is not designed to operate digitally would not succeed. We now learn to actually be far more in demand with our human capabilities in our future jobs, because the very repetitive, simple tasks are going to be taken over by software robots that we create and we control.
The pandemic has been very interesting, highlighting a lot of issues that many of us were aware of for some time, but they've really come to the fore. Black, minority, ethnic founders have really had ongoing challenges in accessing investment compared with their white and often male counterparts. And at the same time, where you live is a second challenge. Put those two together, and as a Black woman founder living in Leeds, that's an incredibly challenging issue for you to deal with. So we've had to really look at things from a different lens, and as investors make changes.
2020 showed us that even the most certain predictions can be eliminated by a problem that affects humanity. For every real entrepreneur, there is something at the very core of everything that we're doing, and this is the purpose. Why is it so significantly important for me to solve a certain problem? Right now, it is even more important to really think, what am I doing with my limited time on this planet?
For many investors in the pandemic, it's actually really changed their thinking, and they will build issues like social impact and sustainability into their investment thesis. So when you're an entrepreneur approaching investors right now, you need to really think how far you can show that you're going to make a really strong impact, either socially, environmentally, globally, that will really help you tune in to where investors are focused right now. So it won't be enough just to have a great technology. It's got to really have that wider and deeper sense of long-term impact. And I think that's really going to attract investment much more successfully in the year ahead.
We see a lot of businesses that have a very strong purpose-driven approach. And that really, I think, is going to be a lot of the future for global development. We had feared that COVID would derail us. In fact, businesses actually are embracing the Sustainable Development Goals as an opportunity. Because of the disruption that we're going through, there are many opportunities opening up here for social entrepreneurs with the right business model, with the right outreach, with the right thinking around how to leverage digital technologies in a better way. We need a lot of innovation, a lot of creativity in those spaces. It doesn't need to be a trade-off between profit and doing good. It actually can be both.
On the space station, you realize how interconnected we all are and how interconnected we are with our environment. When I look at what's happening around the world, is shaking people up to realize that when a problem happens in Wuhan, it impacts the entire world. It can bring large economies to their knees. And this time was a virus. Next time it could be something different, climate change, for example. So let's not just be naive and let's do something now. From everything we've learned, I see more people talking about long-term thinking because they don't want to deal with something like this again.
We have the opportunity to create businesses which follow a new set of rules. What we've given up to a certain extent is our wellness, as we're being invaded by too much news, too much information, too many demands on our time. And being able to step back and say, that doesn't contribute to my wellness. What does is having the time to go for a walk and to switch off. How do we build companies which take people's need for that lifestyle into account? How do we design jobs which don't infringe on our physical and mental wellness? And that to me is the essence of build back better.
Welcome everyone to our panel discussion on EdTech. Is this the end of the traditional classroom as we know it? My name is Hannah Lowe and I am an MBA student at the Oxford Saïd Business School. And prior to my MBA, I was a geography, legal studies and modern history teacher in the Australian country town of Armidale. At Oxford, I hope to learn more about collective intelligence and its application in school systems to leverage its existing talent. I feel super lucky today to be joined by a number of experts in the field of EdTech this afternoon, including Jennie, who is the Global Head of Education Impact at Google. She is also a best-selling author of Courageous Adventures and the founder and president of the nonprofit Our Voice Alliance, whose mission is to elevate marginalized voices and perspectives to improve equity and empathy in education. Previously, she was also a Chicago schools teacher. We're also joined here by Jane Ross, who is the Europe, Middle East, and Africa Education Lead at Zoom Video. She's responsible for the working with universities, schools, and education community at large to truly understand how to connect with students and drive learning and innovation. She's definitely a very timely speaker because we're all on Zoom at the moment. We're also very lucky to have Alex Beat, who is the Senior Director at Teach for All. Alex started out as a teacher in a London comprehensive school before joining Teach for All, a growing network of independent organizations working in 60 countries worldwide to ensure that all children fulfill their potential. He previously presented The Learning Revolution, which is a 3-part mini-series on the future of education for BBC Radio 4. Much of which it's based on his research on education experiences in different parts of the world. I've watched it, I really like it and definitely recommend it. And finally, we are super blessed to have Rafael Gozalo, who is the co-founder and co-CEO of PowerMBA. The PowerMBA is built around short bursts of 15-minute videos of teaching each day, where participants get to learn successful and inspiring leaders like the founders of YouTube and Netflix. And he's definitely trying, and he's quite successful at disrupting the traditional education. I'm so stoked to be speaking to all of you today because I recognize that you all have a genuine connection to education. So today we'll be discussing a few topics for about 40 minutes, followed by a 20-minute Q&A. And I'm hoping that all of you guys will join on those different topics today. And for those of you who are in the audience, please do feel free to send through your questions to our panelists using the Q&A box. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room here, which is COVID-19. We all know that COVID-19 has disrupted learning across much of the world, but the pandemic isn't affecting everyone in the same way. I'm interested, I guess, from our panelists today, what do you think? Will further closures and distance learning exacerbate existing inequalities? And how can we mitigate them? I think we might want to perhaps start with Alex here. What are your thoughts on this?
Thanks so much, Hannah. Yes, so as Hannah said, I started out as a teacher in a school in London, and there I was struck by how similar the kids I taught were to the kids I'd gone to school with, but how different their start in life had been. Whereas I'd gone to this school in the countryside that looked a bit like Hogwarts. I was teaching in the inner city in London, and the kids I taught were quite a long way behind where they should have been in reading and writing through no fault of their own. And at that moment, I just became very interested in how do we ensure that the conditions are right in which kids are growing up, the conditions that surround schools and classrooms, the role that society plays. And I became very interested in the role of tech, of neuroscience, of policy, of systemic change, and ended up at Teach for All, where I run this research lab and we look at the factors that influence how kids do. And we care about two things: reimagining education for the 21st century, and above all, equity. And I'm glad you asked me about that, because I think, what we're seeing everywhere is that the pandemic is exacerbating existing inequalities that are in our school systems, not necessarily through the fault of the schools themselves, but through the fault of our societies and the way that they're set up. We know that kids who have already got more access to resources and perhaps a more comfortable family environment to learn in are learning more currently than peers who maybe don't have access to those things. And I think that the big challenge that we face is what do we do about that if inequalities are being exacerbated? One of my friends who's a teacher put it quite well to me the other day. He said, well, if we knew already how to help the kids that were furthest behind catch up faster than the kids that are already doing okay, we would have been doing that for decades as educators. And so I think that the pandemic has exacerbated a challenge, and perhaps positively, just to mention a couple of things, made it more of an urgent priority for all of us worldwide. It's now much more on the media agenda, much more on government agendas. Teachers and parents, of course, have always known about these inequalities. And I think that we're seeing real leadership at all levels, real leadership coming from students themselves, real leadership coming from parents, from teachers, especially in the classroom, in response to this moment unlike any other, where people are creating solutions that might point the way to how we tackle some of these inequalities. And I think that tech is a part of it. But for me, in all the travels that I've done and looking into this as I've done my book and my show, I would say that tech is a part of the solution, but it's really people that are coming together to solve problems and using tech to help them, rather than tech itself that's going to be the solution to the issues.
That's a lovely thing to think about, that people is definitely still at the center of it, because it's so easy, I guess, with tech to think about efficiency as the primary mean of solving these challenges, but in fact, perhaps it may not. I guess I have another question too, because we talk a lot about change at the business school, and I think change is something that's a timely topic with all things education and all things COVID. But talking about change and actually making change happen, there's a really big gap there, and there's a big step to take. So I'm curious, I guess, from other people in the panel today, what have been some of the bigger obstacles for you when you're engaging with those who might be a bit resistant to this EdTech movement? Now, Jennie, I know you work in Google with lots of different stakeholders. Maybe you can start us with our discussion and other people could join in.
Absolutely. And I think this is really related to the previous topic around equity. We really heard Alex unpacking the digital access divide, which is so obvious and prevalent. And to his point, it's exacerbated equity issues. But I think there's a second level, more insidious divide that folks are talking about and have been talking about for years. I worked on it when I was working with the U.S. Department of Ed on the National EdTech Plan back in 2016, I think, which is the digital use divide. So we're seeing in some places that students who don't always have access to the same opportunity as others are starting to get devices, but the way in which the practitioners who work with them are receiving professional learning and support to understand how to most impactfully and effectively use those devices is not equitable. So we want to make sure that it's not just getting access to the students and families for high-speed internet and devices. It's also making sure that the students, their families, and the practitioners, the educators who work with them understand how to most use them. And that really is an underpinning of the obstacle of getting folks to kind of have that mindset shift. I'm not sure if those who are watching are familiar with Everett Rogers' diffusion of innovation theory. He's a sociologist in the 60s who has this lovely bell curve. I'm a math teacher by trade, so anytime you give me a bell curve or data, I get super stoked about it. You're a grad student, Hannah, so you're probably like, yeah, bell curves. But it kind of breaks down any population. It says that only 16% of your population is going to be really willing to make that mindset change. The other 84% are going to be a little bit more resistant. And in the case of educators, it's not because they don't want to do what's right for their students. It's often because of a lack of understanding, support, and comfort. And so at Google, we're doing a lot, and I know my colleagues here are all working on this as well, to make sure we're giving free and accessible resources to educators and families worldwide to make sure that they can bridge that digital use divide and get that comfort and learning so that they can most impactfully take advantage of the devices and the technology solutions that we're all working so hard to provide. If we can close that knowledge and comfort gap, we're going to see folks more willing to move along that bell curve.
Yeah, I totally agree here. Back to Alex's comment about it's not just the technology, it's the people behind the technology. One important piece that we have seen, and this is from a personal as well as professional perspective, is how important it is for the institutions to provide a strong internal support structure for their educators. And so they need somebody to lean on. They need somebody to teach them how to use the technology. I personally know several teachers, including my niece in America, who actually ended up leaving her position because the schools didn't provide that. They said, here's the technology, go figure out how to use it with your class. And unfortunately, that's a no-win situation for the school, the teachers, the parents, and most importantly, the students.
I would like to add that in our experience, when we propose to end users or to companies some kind of online executive training, there is fear about three things. There are like three weaknesses. People doesn't really understand how they are going to build personal relations and how they are going to build the connections, and that is true. And we have to work on different initiatives and different dynamics to try to solve this gap. Also, people think that training online and Edtech could be boring, and sometimes they are right, because I think that it's not the same the way you teach on a classroom where there is the teacher, there is a human connection, and the way that you have to teach and the way you have to learn on the online, and there is a huge difference. And I think that we are trying to teach on the same way or very similar, and I think that is part also of the problem. And in my third point, just to finish, is people think that online training, online education, all the things that goes around Edtech are not effective. There is an old paradigm and a traditional paradigm about that. You think that you're going to learn much more if you go every day to a class, and maybe in some way it could be true or not 100%. And this is I think that these are like the three key points, at least from our point of view, and with our learning.
I'd just love to add something. I completely agree with what you guys shared. I think that one of the other things that is important in this as a barrier is actually how we understand learning and how it takes place, and how that is or isn't built into some of the EdTech products that have existed in the past and some of the platforms. I think we're seeing a new generation of EdTech that understands the role of teachers, understands and designs for the way that students learn. But I think sometimes in the past, maybe there's been an overpromise of what the tech will be able to do in terms of motivating students. There's been a bit of a focus on things that are really engaging and exciting and user-friendly for students, when we know that learning requires struggle and hard work. And I think there may be even a bit of still an open question about what it's healthy to automate in teaching and learning and what should be left to the humans. And I think that some of that is potentially a barrier. That sort of 10 years ago in a first wave of EdTech, there were lots of bold promises made about what it could do, which maybe have left a few people wondering. But I think that what you guys said, teacher skills, teacher development, designing for teachers and students, as many EdTech organizations are doing now, feels to me to be where the future lies.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that's definitely how I feel about it as a teacher as well. And I guess thinking about some of those things in terms of teaching during COVID and learning during COVID times, there's been quite a lot of technical difficulties in some sense of isolation, some students reporting a lack of motivation. And I guess these are just some of the challenges that have emerged perhaps as a result of education worldwide being thrown into disarray because of coronavirus. So my next question, I guess, for all of you is, do you think, or perhaps does technology create just as many problems as it tries to solve? And what are some of the problems that you think perhaps EdTech does not solve, but you would like to see them address it in the future? Anybody's welcome to jump in.
I'll jump in. I think this is an interesting question, and in that book that I wrote, I kind of talk about this, and it goes back to that digital use divide of I liken technology to a vehicle, because as many have said on this panel, technology is not the destination. It's the vehicle to get us there, right? It's the humans, it's the teaching, it's the learning that's very important. And so if we use that metaphor, we can say, all right, we might have been using a bicycle, and then the devices that we have now are cars or rocket ships. The challenge that therein lies is that if we give someone who's been riding a bicycle their entire life a car without the time to understand it, it can be deeply dangerous, right? You can drive into a wall, you can crash it, like it could be dangerous for other drivers on the road. Same thing in your classroom. I remember when I first went one-to-one in my middle school math classroom, it was a big mess. It was chaos. No one was learning. I was crying. My kids were crying. My husband was crying because I was not a nice person to be around. It did create more chaos than help. But that was because I tried to jump into the driver's seat without first doing some test drives in a parking lot first. And so we need to be cognizant of how, again, we're setting up educators and students for success. But then also as designers of these vehicles, tech companies, like some of us on this call, it's our responsibility and burden to come at the design of our products with humility. And I think oftentimes in the field of education, it's easy for us to rest on our laurels, because most, if not all of us, have been in an education setting once in our lives as students. And so it's easy for us to go back to that paradigm and that schema and say, I know what teaching and learning looks like because I spent 18 to 30 years of my life in a classroom. Well, that's tangibly different than being a practitioner. Moreover, I've spent 2 decades as a practitioner. I've been a school teacher, an instructional coach, a building leader, a system leader, and even worked at the federal government. But I haven't been in a classroom or an education system for a couple years now. And so my industry knowledge has gotten stale. So the best way that companies can make sure that our tools are actually creating opportunity and not potentially confusing or creating added chaos is to be humble about our design process and do what we all, I know, do, which is respect the user. Go to the users now and really don't assume we can understand what they need. Ask questions, listen humbly, ask clarifying questions. And when we think we understand, ask more questions. And secondly, make sure we're asking all the users, invite all the users to the table. When we get back to that equity question, who are we listening to? Whose perspectives are we asking for? Are we designing truly for all users to making access truly equitable, or are we only keeping the majority in mind? So again, I think we need to really, with great power comes great responsibility, as Voltaire and Spider-Man's uncle said. So we need to make sure that we're helping folks understand how to drive this car and designing the best cars in response to our users.
I'm absolutely aligned with you, Jennie. I think that the more simple, the best. Technology is, maybe, at least for us, it has been a very, very extremely powerful ally, and we are reaching thousands of people in a very efficient way and in a very effective way. But we always try to do everything as simple as and the more simple that we can, because if you start from our company point of view, if you start developing new features and new issues on the platform and new functionalities, you start investing a lot of time on that, and maybe in many cases you are not adding value, and you are forgetting your core business. Our core business is teaching. Our core business is not technology. So from our point of view, if you can do it on a simple way, it is better. And technology, definitely, it's the best ally that we are having in this industry right now.
Yeah, to piggyback off of what both Rafa and Jennie said, you know, it's probably the optimist in me, but could you imagine if this pandemic would have hit in, say, 1970 or even 1980? And how could we have possibly adapted education across the globe to support without the technology that we have today? So yes, while it's not perfect and there are definitely opportunities for improvement as always, quite frankly, what we had last year wasn't really designed for a pandemic use case, right? And so we all had to adapt quickly. And I think that in support of my colleagues here and others around the world, I think Edtech has done a pretty good job of stepping up and shifting when requested and in this place of need, right? So, you know, we continue to push forward every day, talking to the community, as Jennie mentioned, you know, getting different aspects, whether it's from parents or students or educators on what it is that they need the technology to do. But most importantly, right now is the time that we need to be very collaborative with one another. And what I mean by that is not retreat into our own silos. So at Zoom, as an example, I mean, we value the chance to collaborate with as many third-party technologies as possible. And then that allows the users to choose best-in-class options for their institution and easily integrate those choices together using one platform. So no one ed tech company is ever going to be everything to everyone. So we truly believe that, you know, offering robust APIs and SDKs that allow that easy integration between different platforms is the key to filling the gaps for the community.
Yeah, I would just like to underscore everything that's been shared with a story. So in our network, last Easter, when schools shut down for the first time here in the UK, over the 2 weeks of the Easter holidays, a group of teachers from a variety of schools over the country just came together to say, well, what can we do in this term that's coming up where kids aren't going to be in school? We need to reach them. And they started recording their own online lessons. And eventually, by the end of 2 weeks of our summer holiday, had a whole online school built called Oak National Academy. And recently, in the past month, it's had 1 million student users every single day. It's kind of got a full curriculum. And they did exactly that. That was a group of people coming together, collaborating, using both Zoom and Google. I don't know the extent to which they sort of form partnerships with your companies, but I know that they were using those tools that were ready-made for educators to be using. And so I think that was an example of, you know, where tech really did help achieve a huge solution for literally hundreds of thousands of kids and parents and teachers across the UK. But I think the thing that's really important there, just building on your point, Jane, is that it was all about the collaboration between people and sort of figuring out how to use some ready-made tools, but adapt some existing tools to really quickly solve a problem. And that seems, just like you were saying, to be a really best case example of how education systems, educators, parents, students can use new technologies effectively in their practice. The only thing, I don't think this is the fault of tech. I'm not saying this is a problem that tech has created, but the only thing that we know with that as well is that, you know, there are those 10%, 20% of students who are less likely to be accessing that online learning despite the huge successes. And I think that there's a challenge for education systems there, which is going to be difficult for tech to solve alone. It's already difficult for educators to solve alone. That maybe requires more thinking, more collaboration, a better understanding of what the issues are that are holding back some of those kids and families.
If I could piggyback on that, Alex, I think that's such a good point. And I think that goes to the point that you were making too about the collaboration between educators and these tech companies. And so, you know, like at Google, we've been doing tons of user research over the past 12 months, and we hear about these families. You know, we heard stories about young people in more rural parts of China who are hiking miles to a hillside to get internet access and sitting on this hill for 3 hours just so they could download their assignments for the day in the rain or shine, in the cold or warmth. And so what we're trying to do is, we can't solve the problem, but we can try and remove as many barriers to our platforms as possible. So, you know, last Wednesday we had our big Learning with Google event, and we announced a bunch of new features. So some of the things that were educator requested and educator designed based on those user conversations with a diverse set of end users were, you know, all of our systems having these offline opportunities like Classroom Android app working offline with intermittent connections. We added the ability to take a photo and scan written work. So if I'm a young person without internet access, I can handwrite my calculus homework or a story map on a piece of paper on the back of a flyer at home on my kitchen table. And then when I go to my uncle's house, my auntie's house, my neighbor's house for, you know, 15 minutes and I can jump on their Wi-Fi network, I can snap a picture of it with my phone. It scans it, translates it, and then puts it onto the Google Classroom platform. So these aren't things that we just auto-magically cooked up in some Google lab. This was all in direct communication and partnership, as you mentioned, Alex, with educators and trying to better understand the challenge and seeing how can we make the technology be less burdensome and be more facile for your use cases.
I was just going to add a very heartening story that I heard from a couple of places, one from Colombia, one from the UK, where phone companies, or I don't know, partnerships of people who are launching these platforms to reach some of the most marginalized kids, were negotiating with various phone companies to get access to the platforms to be data free on smartphones with some success, which I think, you know, again, it speaks to a wider partnership and that kind of ability to build some collective momentum around a particular cause and to achieve a thing.
I guess one of the reasons why I thought this might be a very interesting question to see what challenges you guys think EdTech might not fix is, from my perspective, perhaps, you know, I wonder if social emotional learnings and education is quite a challenge within the classroom already. And I wonder if EdTech could be, you know, a good tool or platform to help assist the delivery of some of those social emotional needs or teachings that we may already have difficulties with. Anybody have any ideas on this, perhaps that you may have already heard of, or is this something that you think might be, we're still a few years from it?
I mean, I could say a few of the scarier things that are happening, which are a kind of counterexample. I think, you know, this is just like more broadly speaking about some of the trends in EdTech that we see. I think some of the ways that AI is being deployed, or people are claiming that they're deploying AI in education, perhaps go against some of the stuff that you've just said. So I think some of the personalized learning systems that have been created, some of the adaptive learning platforms, almost have the opposite effect of narrowing education a little bit, being really good at things like test prep, because that's a slightly more closed environment in which you can apply technology to kind of go through a more standardized sequence of learning. And then connected to that, some of the stuff that we're seeing in terms of, you know, matching facial expressions to emotional states and then tagging that against learning. I think a lot of that is I mean, first of all, I think a lot of it seems currently overblown. I'm not sure anybody's really implementing that stuff very well, but it's also, I think, traveling in a direction that has the potential to be restrictive rather than opening up education opportunities. So I think, building on what you said, I think it's possible that EdTech can give access to a greater array of social and emotional learning. But for me, it would go back to what everybody's been saying so far, I think, which is how far are we allowing humans to engage with one another in learning experiences that are focused on that kind of thing. And I think in terms of deciding what we learn within an education system, the pandemic has actually thrown that question up again as well. Certainly around our network, we're seeing a much bigger focus on student well-being because student well-being has been affected by the pandemic. And so people are beginning to ask, well, how do we use these online spaces in which we're now educating, in which we exist, to change our pedagogy, to change the focus of our learning, to focus on a broader set of student outcomes rather than on a narrower set. And so I think the kind of EdTech that we've been talking about so far on this panel feels part of that new wave, which is about a more expansive kind of education, which is about supporting humans to do the good human things that are involved in a classroom or a pedagogical exchange of some kind. But I think there is another trend in EdTech which perhaps is going in a different direction and that has some dangers inherent in it.
I think that's certainly true. And I think, you know, again, thinking about using that metaphor of like the power of it, we can use our powers for good or for otherwise. And I think with intentionality, to your question, Hannah, I not only do I believe educational technology can have positive impact on social emotional learning, but I've witnessed it firsthand. So again, like going back to my classroom in Chicago, I had 37 fourth and fifth graders in my room the year that I went one-to-one. And I was kind of a bit scattered trying to keep up with it. I had 45 minutes to teach all of the maths lessons to 2 grades of students. I had 37 of them and one of me, no other support. And I felt constantly late for the bus. And so I was constantly missing it out on SEL check-ins with my students, just treating them like human beings, checking in with their well-being. I got the idea to use Google Forms for a mood check-in every day. So they would come in and they would have bookmarked. The very first page that would come up on their Chromebook when they walked into my classroom was a Google form that they helped design that said, where are you at today? And there was kind of this mood meter where they talked about how they were feeling. They said if they needed a one-on-one conference with me, they gave me some more information about why they said that. And they set a goal for the day. Now, of my 37 students, not every single student wanted a check-in with me. Sometimes they wanted to check in with me for good things. They wanted to be like, hey, Miss Magiera, I have a new baby sister and I want to show you a picture. I won an award this weekend. Other times it would be something really concerning, like I'm being bullied or I'm afraid of something or something's happening in my home that I need to unpack with you. They'd be reaching out for each other. And what the form allowed me to do with conditional formatting was putting keywords. So if I saw the word bullying, fear, scared, it lit up the cell. So I got 37 responses a day. I didn't have time to read them in class, but I could skim the spreadsheet and it would light up like a Christmas tree. And I could see like, I need to check in with Johnny. He's having something that seems dangerous, or I need to tell Jahim congratulations because that's really great and he should get some love for that. And it made me such a better teacher of humans instead of just math students. So before I taught math, and then after the mood check-in, I was able to teach my humans, to your point, Alex. And that would not have been possible without the technology, but there had to be intentionality behind it. And again, to your point, Alex, I really had to think about how I was maximizing my connection to humans rather than trying to automate my connection to them as humans. And there's a lot of tools out there that are doing that now. So, I had to learn how to create a Google form, how to do data spreadsheets, all of that. But, there's companies like Class Catalyst. Carla Tantillo is the founder, and she's working with the University of Chicago here to do really incredible research to create human-centered design around SEL and technology. So I think there are a lot of people who are using their powers for good. And with that being said, I think we need to continue speaking up, as you said, Alex, and gut checking each other to make sure, is this truly enhancing our humanity rather than automating it?
I think that I think that sky is the limit. I'm going to bring a personal experience that it's happening to me on the previous months. I would never, I have a personal trainer to try to get fit and to do some exercise, and I'm doing it on Zoom from my home. I would never expect this 2 years ago. It would be absolutely unexpected because I have my own paradigm, and I put my own limitations. And right now I'm having a plenty and a full experience with him. I am connected with him, and he's helping me a lot from my home. And thanks to him, I am getting fit. I'm more committed with my health, and I'm doing that from my home, just jumping every morning on Zoom. So this is, if someone would ask me this, I don't know, maybe 1 year ago, I would say it's impossible to do exercise from your home with a personal trainer or whatever. You have to go to the gym. You have to go outside to jump or to run or to whatever. So I think it's absolutely amazing what is happening.
We just have a few questions that are coming in from our audience. The first question is, do you think EdTech should replace physical schools in rural areas where infrastructure or access is difficult? Big question.
I can share just so another story from our network during the pandemic. Again, it was a group of teachers in Chile, and they had heard the story of a group of teachers in Nigeria who had started doing television teaching across Ogun State in southern Nigeria, reaching, again, millions of kids in theory with the lessons that were going out. And these teachers in Chile set up a radio show, which they got syndicated across 200 radio stations in Chile, and is reaching something like 3,000 rural communities, 3,000 rural schools with these daily lessons. They've actually now added this sort of interactive mobile-based platform so that kids can send in work and get feedback from teachers. But they're believing that this is going to remain a permanent feature of the Chilean education system beyond the end of the pandemic, because distance learning in a country as big as Chile with so many remote communities has always been a challenge. But somehow the urgency of the challenge was felt even more in the past year. Perhaps the bits of funding that were available, the partnerships suddenly became possible that hadn't been possible before to put this infrastructure into place. Now, I don't think that they're saying that that will replace rural schools. I think what they're trying to design for now is what can they do to support teachers and students who are operating in those rural schools. So in general, these examples like Oak National Academy, this one called La Radio Enseña, the teaching in Nigeria, mostly have designed content to support the parent, student, teacher unit as it exists in whatever setting it's in, whatever community that is taking place in. So I think place will always play a role. And then there definitely will be virtual elements, I think, that will remain permanent features of our system after this pandemic recedes, hopefully before too long.
I do not have a clear answer for this, because it's a very complicated question. But I just want to share with you. That maybe if we think, I don't know if you know the robotical chirurgy. I don't know if you know the robotics that are helping chirurgists on that. It's called Da Vinci. We are not far to achieve that a doctor in LA can do the chirurgy to a patient in Madrid with Da Vinci. So if someone is going to be able to jump into your body and do a chirurgy from in the distance, why not learning from very, very good teachers on the distance? I mean, is it absolutely necessary? I think that we are not ready to imagine what is going to happen on the next 20 years. But I think that it is going to be surprising.
Yeah, and I think it also fills one of those inequality gaps, right? So if you can deliver higher quality teaching to remote areas that were before limited to the talent that they had immediately available, you know, that's a game changer. And so that's actually a gap that's something that can fill a gap in inequality.
I'd want to, I guess a word of caution about it. Anytime I hear the word replace and schools or educators, I want to take a step back, and the educator in me takes pause. I think that enhance, supplement, support might be better ways to think about it for a couple of reasons. One, I don't know if it's the role of EdTech to pass judgment on the quality of talent in rural areas and urban areas, anywhere. Oftentimes it might not be the innate talent of folks as practitioners so much as the support that they did or did not receive. And so how might we better support them? And then two, going back to the humanistic part of it, I'm a big Star Trek fan. I'm a big sci-fi nerd. I love it. I'm so excited. It's like has a whole new like renaissance right now. I'm all about the new shows. But if you've seen one of the reboots of like the original Star Trek with like Spock and Captain Kirk, one of the movies, I forget which one it was, it shows Spock as a young man in the Vulcan Academy of Sciences. I'm sorry, I'm taking y'all down a rabbit hole. Just come with me, just go with it. And it's like this big like sci-fi gymnasium room, and there's like these lowered like vestibules that are like kind of our divots in the ground, like almost like holes in the ground that each child is standing in. And it's a 360 screen. And each child's literally in a physical silo by themselves. And all the practitioners, all the teachers are just like standing, like all the Vulcans are just walking at surface level, looking down into these holes where the students, there's thousands of students in this room learning alone in a 360 video. And it's the saddest thing I've ever seen. I think it's the saddest dystopian view of what education can become, where we have literally 1,000 people in a room together and none of them are engaging with one another. They're only engaging with tech. And I think the purpose of school isn't just to convey information to students. It's to help them learn how to grow, how to be critical thinkers, how to be social creatures, to interact with one another. And so I really hope that whatever technology evolves to in the future, and I'm not trying to dismiss or belittle the challenges of resourcing and access that rural areas have. That's a true challenge that we need to address among our communities. I want to make sure we're keeping in mind how we're valuing the talent of the people in the space and maintaining our dedication to the humanity and the whole child and the socialization aspect of education as well.
We just have another question that's really good, and I think feeds on very well here. It just says, during COVID, we learned very quickly that online education is a collaborative activity and deeply embedded in context. Which partnerships or collaborations are missing or needed to make the work of EdTech companies more effective and impactful? I can see everyone's got their thinking caps on. I don't know, perhaps Jane or Rafa might have some ideas on this one.
You know, I don't really have a good answer for this. I mean, I think we're only limited by our own imaginations, to be honest with you. I mean, I know internally at Zoom, we're talking to a whole range of different third-party companies that we probably wouldn't have been had the pandemic not thrown us into this space that we're in right now. But we're really limited only by you know, what's in front of us and what our imaginations are limited to.
I feel comfortable answering just around the executive education, because I feel better there, because there is my experience. So I'm just answering, you know, in this narrow area. I think that we have to be very, very close to business schools and all the trainers has to be very close to companies to try to understand what do they need, where are the gaps, to try to fill them, because the world is changing so extremely fast, faster than ever, and companies are moving so fast, and the needs of the companies are moving so fast that we need to be very close to them to try to adapt every single day the learnings, the materials, the contents, and we are very obsessed with that, and this is what we are trying to do every day.
I was just going to add that, you know, beyond the more obvious things that people might be thinking of, one of the things that has come up a lot in our network, I don't know how much this is relevant to answer the question, but we're seeing that the most effective solutions that have been created, which have involved partnerships between companies, policymakers, NGOs, you know, school system leaders. I think that one of the key other elements that has helped to make these things successful, they've also involved quite heavily the beneficiaries, the end users, the students, the parents, the teachers as partners in, first of all, defining what the challenge might be. So there's a big element of listening, authentic listening, not listening with a sort of agenda in mind. Then there's almost like a sort of co-design process that we've seen happening, where there's an iteration that is really happening with those end users in the education sphere. And that is seeming to be one of the forces that is driving success for some of these solutions that we've seen created that have involved, you know, more of your classic type of partnerships in the first place.
And I think to that end, kind of going back to our previous conversation of just like having humility where we're not the experts. So, you know, like I said, I could easily just, again, rest on my laurels and say like, oh, look at what I've done. I've spent almost 2 decades in this space and sat in all these different seats. I know education, but that would have a level of arrogance and hubris of me to say. And so as we're going into a space and designing a new solution or a program, engage with the folks out there who are doing the work every day. So, for example, we're digging into looking at our anti-racist work and our equity work. And so we're partnering with an organization called The Conscious Kid to help us better understand and bring expertise into the space so that our powers combined, we can create an impact rather than we're, you know, kind of on the side trying to figure it out ourselves. Conscious Kid is doing this every day. It's their lived experience. It's their niche level of expertise. And so to your point, Rafa, you know, the way you answer the question is what inspired me to say this was like, you were like, I'm going to speak to what I know, right? Like, this is what my area. So like, if I needed to work with higher ed and think about, you know, folks who are trying to go through MBAs or business schools, I'd be like, now I know Rafa, I'm going to go to him. That's because that's not mine. I don't know that. So I think, you know, not being afraid to say we don't know something, or we don't even know what we don't know, and then creating and forging partnerships so that we're working with the people who are truly experts.
We might end with one last question, and I think it's a bit of a fun question that's quite different. It says here, many mobile devices can easily and cheaply converted to VR devices, while 360-degree video cameras are becoming more common. What work is being done to use virtual reality classrooms to students across the globe? So what work is being done to use virtual reality classrooms to students across the globe? Very interesting, crazy.
Not look at me, no answer for this.
I was actually just going to jump in and say, we have, while we are internally at Zoom looking at that technology, I think that from an EdTech perspective and what we're expecting of the community, that's a little advanced right now, to be honest with you. A lot of our teachers are still just trying to figure out, how do I keep my classes engaging, and how do I, you know, keep track of which students are here and which students aren't here. And so there's a lot of cool stuff that's on the horizon with virtual reality for sure. But I think it's a little too early to tell yet.
I think for us, at Google, we have a lot of these products. We have Tour Creator, we have like our some of other AR VR solutions. And while that's not something that is part of our core services for Google for Education right now, I'm like constantly inspired by the ingenuity of educators who, if you give them like, a foot of tape, a ruler, and a phone, they're going to invent a rocket ship. So, there are educators out there who are taking their kids to, Versailles via Tour Creator, who are, saying like, okay, we can't go on physical field trips anymore, but we're going to still travel the world. We're going to use, Google Cardboard and different things with the Google Cardboard app to think about building empathy with each other, like literally walking in someone else's shoes, checking out the inside of a cochlear implant. So there's lots of really innovative work, but I would agree with Jane. I think right now, a lot of us are trying to think about like ground level priorities for folks of like thinking about their educational Maslow hierarchy of needs, trying to make sure that their educational souls are fed and watered. But that's not stopping educators who are like, I want more. I need more to this meal. I'm going to add some hot sauce and salt. I'm going to grab some AR VR and add that to my meal. So kudos and so inspiring to all of you out there who are doing the work with the tools. And, kind of going back to that previous thing, if you think that there's something that one of us on this panel can do with our organizations to better help you use AR and VR, and you're like, hey, we think this should be part of your core work, we want that feedback. Feedback is a gift. So thank you.
I'd just love to underline that point, Jenny. And I think, what you're saying makes me think of an earlier point you made, and it's just about how this is ultimately going to be about what educators do with the tools that exist that are out there. Now, we can make these tools easier for those educators to access and use in their classrooms, as Jenny was describing with some of her products. But it's down to the teacher. And I think like if there's one thing that, I would love to leave as a message, it's that education in the 21st century is all about the teacher in the classroom. Now, I think that what we're seeing in our network in this pandemic and before is that maybe that role could be shifting, and maybe we could put teachers more on a pedestal. We should, rather than seeing them as sort of end users who we're not really thinking about or designing for, put the teacher at the center, understand that teachers in the future will be using these kind of tech tools, train them to help them to do that, help them to understand the learning science more, help them to understand kind of the group psychology so they can build community in their classroom, allow them to continue to be subject experts. And for me, then it becomes a question of, well, what are the conditions that we can create in which teachers can thrive themselves in that way so that they use all of these amazing tools because they have the time, they have their extra energy to bring those things into their practice.
That's such a lovely comment to end on. Now, as we're approaching towards the end of this session, I just want to thank all our experts and our audience for being so generous with your time today. And just cycling back to the topic of whether EdTech is the end of the traditional classroom, I feel like we can all take away from this session feeling a little bit more optimistic about education in the future. Now, for our audience, I'd invite you all to take a little quick stretch break and join us in the next panel discussion on diversity, inclusion, and innovation in venture funding. And as always, and as Jenny had mentioned earlier, feedback is really a gift. So please do rate the session at the end. And for now, good afternoon, good evening, and good night to everyone.